You are listening to the FEBIS podcast, and my name is Sylvia Amaral. To know more about FEBIS, visit our web at www.febis.org and follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Please subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the FEBIS podcast. Last episode, we talked about European legislative process and the European elections, an attempt to understand how the legislative process works and what the EU elections could bring. At the time, we agreed on this new appointment with Eleonora Chiari, associate at Cataneo, Zaneto, Pomposo and Co., leading Italian public affairs, lobbying, and political intelligence firm. Eleonora, thank you for joining us again to comment on the aftermath of the European elections.
Good morning, Sylvia. Thank you for having me.
Well, but that is not all. For some insights at the end on FEBIS activity in the coming months, we have also Jan Stange, FEBIS legal counsel, and Stephanie Verilac-Marzin, FEBIS regulatory affairs coordinator. So thank you all for having joined today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to start with asking you, Eleonora. Last time we left off talking about the European election polls. So, about 2 months after these elections, we are now. What can you tell us about the new political institutional setup at European level?
So, the weeks following the European elections brought many changes actually. Starting from the European Parliament, we now have 8 political groups. So, one more group with respect to the previous term. The current composition sees the EPP, so the European People's Party, a center right group, maintaining its leading position with 188 MEPs, so even more than last term. The S&D, Socialist and Democrats group, so a center-left group, lost a few seats but retains its solid second position with 136 MEPs. Then we have Patriots for Europe, the new far-right group who placed itself in third place with 84 MEPs. This group has essentially replaced the old Identity and Democracy group with a few additions, such as Viktor Orban Fidesz party. Immediately after it, we find the right-wing ECR group with 81 MEPs, so a group that also enlarged compared to the previous term. Next, we find Renew Europe, the Liberals, who lost many seats due to the defeat of Emmanuel Macron in France and the disappearance of Ciudadanos in Spain, and only retains 77 MEPs. Then we have the Greens, who also came out defeated of these elections with only 53 seats. Then we have the left-wing group called The Left, with 46 seats, and finally the new far-right group, Europe of Sovereign Nations, with 25 MEPs. This group is led by German AfD delegation, which had been previously expelled from former Identity and Democracy group shortly before the election.
In that case, what does this new setup of the European Parliament tell us about the dynamics between the political groups?
So, first of all, it is quite evident that there has been a shift to the right, as predicted by the polls. We have seen this particularly in some member states, such as France and Germany. However, also due to the purely proportional system by which the seats in the European Parliament are allocated, this shift has not translated into a new right wing majority in the Parliament. In fact, the so-called Ursula majority, composed by EPP, SD, and Renew groups, although weakened by Renew's losses, held on. This, of course, has to do with the fact that as long as the center-left SD group is so large and the parliamentary majority cannot disregard it, there will be no room in this majority for right wing or far right groups like Patriots for Europe or ECR. In this, it is undeniable, however, that the right-wing groups now have a much more important presence in the parliament, with Patriots for Europe and ECR fourth immediately following. It will therefore be interesting to see how they manage to influence legislation compared to the past experience, when the old ID group was always excluded through the application of the so-called cordon sanitaire. Actually, the Patriots for Europe group has already seen the first effects of the cordon sanitaire during these first weeks. In fact, pro-European groups teamed up in order to prevent MEPs from the Patriots for Europe to gain institutional roles, such as vice presidency of the parliament, chairs or vice chairs of parliament committees. However, from now on, it will be much more difficult to shield this group on policy matters given its size.
I see. And what about the so-called top jobs? How did they play out?
So the expression top jobs refers to the highest positions at the European level, namely the presidency of the European Commission, the presidency of the European Council, which is the body that brings together the heads of state and government, and the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, which we can compare to EU Foreign Affairs Minister. These positions are appointed by the European Council by qualified majority, after which the president of the council of the European Council is considered elected, while the candidate for president of the Commission and the High Representative must be endorsed by the European Parliament by absolute majority. As you know, Antonio Costa, who is the former Portuguese Prime Minister and a member of the Social and Democrats family, has been elected President of the European Council, while Ursula von der Leyen from the EPP has already been reconfirmed as President of the Commission for another term. Finally, the candidate for High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, who is a liberal and a former Estonian Prime Minister, will need to be reconfirmed by Parliament in autumn. These three appointments did not come as a surprise, as it was well known that there was broad consensus among the leaders regarding these names. However, these names were chosen and negotiated by the leaders of the EPP, SD, and Renew groups without involving the other groups. Therefore, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban distanced themselves from their colleagues' positive votes. While Meloni voted against Costa and Kallas and abstained on von der Leyen, Orban voted against von der Leyen in favor of Costa and abstained on Kallas. So they kind of isolated themselves and put themselves in a corner there.
Well, interesting. As you said, von der Leyen has already been confirmed by the parliament. By what kind of majority was she supported?
In Parliament, the vote was held by secret ballot, so we cannot be absolutely certain about who supported von der Leyen. The votes needed for her reconfirmation were 361, and the majority that had supported her in 2019, so EPP, SND, and Renew groups, amounted to 401 votes. Theoretically sufficient, but with too narrow a margin. Indeed, when it's a secret ballot, one must account for rebel voters, namely those who vote differently from what was agreed upon by their political group. In the weeks leading up to the vote, von der Leyen tried to negotiate with everybody and drafted a political program that took into account the different priorities of the groups. In the end, despite rebel voters, von der Leyen was generally supported by EPP, SND, Renew, and also the Greens, obtaining by 401 votes in favor. So she had a 4-vote margin. This result is quite surprising, considering that in 2019 she had passed with only a 9-vote margin. The ECR group, and in particular Fratelli d'Italia, which represents ECR largest delegation, admitted they voted against her, placing Giorgia Meloni and her group in a position of further isolation after the European Council from the pro European majority and from President von der Leyen, with whom she had built a close relationship. So, this is interesting, especially in view of the appointment of the commissioners, which is already ongoing.
Okay, I suppose that the scene is set and now we have to wait. Thank you, Eleonora, for this overview. And just to conclude, could you briefly outline what are the next steps?
So at this point, the only body that still needs to be formed at European level is the new College of Commissioners, that together with President von der Leyen will form the political leadership of the European Commission. Each member state has right to one commissioner. President von der Leyen has already formally requested that member states submit two candidates for the role of commissioner, one man and one woman, to ensure gender balance. They have until August 30th to do so, but starting from mid-August, von der Leyen will begin interviewing the candidates and, most importantly, allocating the portfolios. In September, the candidates chosen by von der Leyen will need to be heard by the relevant parliamentary committees for their portfolio and will finally be subjected to a vote by the parliament in a plenary session. So around November, the new leadership of the commission should be able to take office.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Eleonora, but hold on with us because now we will talk a little bit more what all this means for FEBIS. Taking all these new elements into account, what will be FEBIS advocacy focus in the coming months?
Thank you, Sylvia, for giving me the floor, and yeah, thank you for having me here today. So, concerning advocacy, I mean, Stephanie and I are always saying that it's as much as about engaging with policymakers as it is about setting priorities. So, the FEBIS strategy for 2024 to 2029, so the parliamentary term, is going to involve, let's say, an even stronger proactive approach as in the past couple of months, weeks, and maybe even years. So we divided it in three major steps. So first of all, it's the building relationships with MEPs, so members of the European Parliament, meaning that FEBIS here is obviously starting to plan or is already building strong relationships with members of the European Parliament, as we already did the past weeks, because we are now providing MEPs with valuable insights and data. And last week, FEBIS was, just to give you an example, in Brussels, here distributing our FEBIS manifesto. The aim is obviously here to become a trusted advisor on issues related to business information services, meaning, for instance, regular briefings or roundtable discussions or even collaborative events will be key tactics here in this engagement strategy. As a second step, always obviously is the participating in public consultations, as FEBIS already is doing in the past, well, years, decades. Here, obviously, we will continue actively participating in public consultations and contribute to policy debates, as Stephanie, together with the Regulatory Affairs Committee, is already doing, or has been doing in the past years, obviously here to ensure that the perspective of business information services providers are considerate in legislative processes. And lastly, I would say what is even more important is, and just having a look on FEBIS logo, Stronger Together, just when it comes to coalition building. So coalition building we see as another critical component here of FEBIS strategy by forming these alliances with other industry associations and stakeholders. FEBIS can actually amplify its voice and influence. And collaborative efforts here will focus mainly on common goals, such as, for example, enhancing data access or supporting innovation. But lastly, also in promoting fair competition. So just coming back to your question, a future outlook. I think looking to the future, to the next term, just coming back what I said in the beginning, FEBIS advocacy strategy or is and will be designed to be adaptive and forward looking. I think it's important that this we have a strategy that is dynamic, and also here then keeping an eye on emerging trends that could impact the sector, because this proactive approach that FEBIS will going to continue will here of course anticipate challenges and then also opportunities, and here ensuring that our advocacy efforts remain relevant and effective.
Stephanie, turning now to you, maybe you could let us know what will be the policy issues that FEBIS will focus on in the coming months.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me again. And as Jan was saying, I mean, the whole advocacy strategy is pretty clear, but what's still in the limbo is going to see is to see which policy issue, what are going to be the policy priorities of the European Parliament. And first of all, it's still crucial to see who will be responsible for what within the European Parliament, because as Eleonora rightly pointed out, the main responsibilities, such as the chairs, the vice chairs, or the group coordinators, have already been set out. But now, after the summer break, what remains to be set is the breakdown of the main dossiers by political groups and by rapporteur. So let me give you a concrete example. For example, if we take a file which is of importance and has been of importance for FEBIS members and business information providers, the FIDA, Financial Data Access Regulation. So the file has not been finalized by the last parliament, so it will go through to this new one. But the MEP that was the original rapporteur in the past parliament has not been re-elected. So what remains to be seen is who's going to be appointed as the main rapporteur for this file, and then also who are going to be the new shadow rapporteurs of the different other political groups, because then they would, of course, become key interlocutors for FEBIS to go through and to run our advocacy strategy. So in terms of major issues, as I said, I mean, we obviously have the open finance and the financial data access and anything that relates to data. But we can fairly say also that GDPR will be a key one. And there are some new developments there, with the European Commission already issuing a report on GDPR, and with FEBIS joining coalition building also with other industry associations to support a risk-based approach and a more business-friendly approach to GDPR review. The better regulation approach will remain key, trying to lift some of the unnecessary regulation and to keep only what's important, especially with the SMB focus, just to say that there shouldn't be too much regulation and burden for the small businesses. That's going to be mainly a priority for the European Parliament, I guess, across all the political groups. The EU sustainability policy continuation, so the implementation of what has been adopted in the past as regards the Green Deal and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive or the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. How is this going to be translated into concrete terms? This is an important point to follow. And of course, the implementing act and secondary legislation following the adoption of the Artificial Intelligence Acts are going to be also a very important point to monitor. And last but not least, the implementation of the new anti-money laundering framework, which has just been adopted before the end of the term, and the discussion of legitimate interest will be a very important point for FEBIS members and for the business information providers in general.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Well, I would say thank you very much, the three of you, Eleonora, Stephanie, and Jan, for your overviews. We come to the end of this episode, but of course, we promise to be back for further updates on the different EU policies and their interaction with the business information industry. Until then, take care of yourselves and talk soon.
We would love to hear your feedback and thoughts for future episodes. You have been listening to the FEBIS podcast. If you like the content, please subscribe. Thank you for listening.